Welcome to, I don't know what this is. I'm Tim Wilde from Saints on Cinema, here with two of the three G.I. Joburg boys and Excess. And this is not a G.I. Joburg episode either. This is just a wild interview because I'm Tim Wilde and I wanted to interview these guys about their playtime in the G.I. Joburg world of their childhood. And with me again is Steve from G.I. Joburg. Say hello, Steve.
Hello, Steve.
I think anyone watching knows who you are. Hello,
terrible.
Steve. And this is my first privilege to meet Rob. And before we go any further, I want to say, Rob, I mean no offense by this. I just want to tell you why this is exciting for me because I became introduced to G.I. Joburg about 2 years ago. Followed a lot of things and then started following the podcast. Started from the old episodes about 6 months ago-ish, maybe less. And, right at the beginning, I was, trying to figure out what Rob's role was, what he contributed. You always had great things to say, but you're always the quiet one. You're always so pensive and collective. And I was like, where's this flavor? Because between every time you said something was awesome or fantastic, and Paul saying everything is so cool and cool and cool, between those three words, Steve would have 1,000 words that he would throw into the conversation. I was like, Rob is so quiet. And then the strangest thing happened. I got to the Ninja Force episode, and listening to your, let's see, how do I put it? Your passive-aggressive rant just absolutely destroying those vehicles and the Ninja Viper and just obliterating them with that same passive collective tone. I was like, I now understand Rob, and you've been so hilarious to me ever since. So it took me a while to get your personality, but ever since then, and then you left the show, I was like, oh, I miss Rob, he's so awesome. 6 months ago, a year ago, I never would have thought I could sit through an entire Rob episode. But when you came back and they had that whole Rob episode, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. So I love what you bring to the show. I don't mean that in any offense. It's just your tone and everything. But when you bring it, that's how you talk, and I get it now. Once you get Rob, you're with Rob. You fly with him. Is that pretty accurate, Steve?
Is it?
I think so.
Absolutely. Why do you think I've kept him around?
And I don't mean it's an acquired taste. It's it takes me a second I get it. I understand Rob, and he's hilarious. And if anyone watching this hasn't watched or listened to the Ninja Force podcast, that's a great one. Anyway, and in the shadows of all their conversations, there was always this looming presence of this phantom character from their past, Aleister. And I've never seen him until right now, and I said, assuming this is him, that's Aleister. And he's been on the show, once or twice? You're on G.I. Joburg, right?
Something like that. He's also been of invaluable assistance in making Blood in the Water, which was a play motion shot around Aleister's home. Yeah, man. Hey, Al.
The reason I wanted to do this,
Mr. Stokel.
Yeah, no one will know who that is from the conversations. I wanted to have this discussion because I instantly fell in love with how much you guys as adults just still embrace and love the franchise of G.I. Joe, and how much you guys play with the toys and are proud to be adults still playing with your toys, to the point of filming it and then writing amazing narratives and then putting it on YouTube for all the world to stare at and enjoy. And I want to kind of dive deeper into kind of how this worked as kids, because you guys will start telling little nuggets of a story or an incident or examples of things that you did as children. And I was like, every time I hear little pieces, I'm like, oh, I have 1,000 questions, because I'm so intrigued with that. Because I, as a grown 4-year-old man, still play with my toys. I mean, not as much as I used to, but all through my 20s and 30s, I still was playing with Legos. I mean, and I don't mean assembling them and putting them on display. I mean, playing with them. I still buy G.I. Joes, and I still have fun with that. And for years, I was like, is there something wrong with me? Is this some kind of a weird phenomenon where I have some inability to mature past the age?
No, you were just born on the wrong continent. You should have been born in South Africa.
Is that it? Is
You've been playing with us all these years.
I always thought it was just weird of me, because I'm like, how come everyone else grew out of playing with toys in their early, even before teens, and I didn't? And I was still trying to buy toys and playing with my toys. And then I discovered your channel. I'm like, oh, I'm not alone in the world. That there are still people out there embracing and still living their childhood. And then the more you guys talked about it, I don't know any group of people that can have so much of a relationship with their toys from their childhoods that they can do an entire episode about eBay purchases or Toys R Us purchase experiences and things like that. I'm like, you guys have just been loving and embracing this stuff, and in your memory, just collecting all these this identity of these childhood players for years, and you're still in tune with that, or you're tapped in. And I'm like, I want to understand a little bit more of that. And so the point of this conversation is I wanted to talk to the three of you, and I would love to have Paula in there, but Paul's going to have a whole different story, a whole different set of answers. We could do that a little differently another time. But I wanted to hear from you three, because you three are the ones that played together as kids, and I wanted to hear about that. So I had some questions I want to kind of break down into it. I'm going to try and run through. I have a lot of praise for you guys I can regurgitate, but we're going to skip all that, because just know I love you guys. I really do. I think it's really important. I was sharing with Steve the first time I talked to him how I think it's important that you guys have connected so well with the spirit of what's good about this license, this franchise. And I think it's important. And it sucks that so many people, and it could be any franchise, but it's just you guys have connected with the most important part, and you guys celebrate it, you love it, and you cherish it, and you share it. And I think that's really cool, because there's a lot of people out there like me who can appreciate that. So before we go into it, I just wanted to kind of get a little bit, just a really quick background of you guys as friends and connecting that with G.I. Joe. So I want to start with Aleister. Because I hear them talk on the podcast, but I want to hear just really quickly how you guys kind of became friends, and like who was friends first, and if you guys as friends collectively discovered G.I. Joe together, or if you each individually loved G.I. Joe and then that's what made you friends, or how did that work? How did you guys get to know each other, and where did you discover G.I. Joe?
Well, I met Steve in pre-primary school. He can probably correct me on the age, but we were about 3. So it's been a friendship that spanned 3 decades. And he introduced me to G.I. Joe. He was into it from the very beginning. I was never really into it. I've to this day never owned a figure.
Really?
I always played. Yeah. Was never a collector or the avid guy behind it. It was always Steve and Rob's toys. So yeah. And then Rob's a family friend of Steve's, and we just met as kids and played games together. That's it.
Yeah, I think Steven had enough toys for all 3 of us to play with. I mean,
well,
and all the neighborhood kids.
Yeah, that's true. Everyone come around to Steve's house.
So that was one of my other questions, was did you guys each have like a small collection that kind of became one giant collection? Because I have a massive Lego collection that started as individual childhood friends that it slowly grew as it went from owner to owner, like National Treasure, the movie, right? It just got bigger and bigger, and now it's in my possession. It's like 8 different kids collection that's in my custody. I thought I was thinking like maybe that's how you guys may have been with your action figures, because when Rob and Steve, when you two are talking, a lot of times you're like, you had this and I had this and I had this and but then you borrowed this and you always played with this, and it felt to me like it was just a community pot of figures.
Yeah, essentially I realized I didn't play so much on my own. I really just play with Steven. So in the end, I was just like, just leave everything at Steven's place. And he's got the better memory, so he remembers a lot better, like what belongs to me and what belongs to him. I mean, I have most of it now, because I mean, when he kind of had to go overseas, he was like, you can have some of this stuff. I think it's almost prescient, because I mean, then COVID hit, and then like I would have no access to any of my toys at all. Yeah, so I just left everything in his place. I think some of it's still there, actually, like my
no, whatever's still there is mine.
No, it's your mom's.
So Rob, how did you get into G.I. Joe? Was that also through Steve, or did you just do it separately?
Well, I initially I grew up in KwaZulu-Natal, which is a separate province on the eastern coast of South Africa, and I played a lot with He-Man figures and what are they called, Thundercats, and I got a few G.I. Joes separately, and they're probably my more favored toys. So when I did meet Stephen, I already owned a couple, and also Bionic 6, which was a similar scale. And yeah, I think just through him, then it was like, okay, GI Joe is the focus now. We gotta focus on GI Joe. Let's just buy those. And then
So
we
wait-
did kind of go through a phase of superhero figures as well. But yeah, GI Joe was, I mean, I think he definitely influenced me and made me want to only collect GI Joe.
Gotcha. So this is the other question. When you guys were discovering G.I. Joe, was it through the action figures before the comics? Because I know you guys, from what I understand, you guys discovered the cartoon much later. But was it the figures and file cards and then the comics? Or was it the comics and you started buying the figures?
The story I tell is that absolutely it was the figures first. But I did manage to rent G.I. Joe the movie, which was pretty mind-blowing back in the day to see it animated. But that dealt with a group of G.I. Joes and Cobras that were no longer available for purchase. So it was kind of an unfortunate tease in terms of showing us the mythology of G.I. Joe, but none of the characters that we could purchase. So I'd say the first kind of instructional information we got in how to play with G.I. Joe actually was the Nintendo game that was released in 1990, for me at least. Yeah, so that was my earliest kind of like, okay, that's what you do with these toys. You kind of like battle through all the cannon fodder and there's a boss. And then you change to another environment and battle through all the cannon fodder and then there's a boss. Like, a very kind of video game-esque play pattern. But once we got older and got more sophisticated, then things got very interesting.
Okay.
Yes. Well,
all right.
Look, Tim, we were playing well into our 20s. Like that's how crazy this almost like, I don't know, this little cult that the three of us held.
So
Exactly.
Al, you were still playing with them into the 20s as well?
Not as much as Steve and Rob.
Okay.
You know,
Oh please.
life happens. Yeah,
So-
things change, and I mean, I moved I moved away from Cape Town in my mid-20s. I've been living up the coast, so just contact was to a minimum.
So
you just grow apart, I suppose.
right. Just curious about that too, Al. Do you feel like if you had been still local and still close with these guys, you would have been like always like into it as much as they're still like on the podcast or anything, or do you have this like, well, you know, there's other more important things in life than celebrating this toy franchise? No discredit for G.I. Joburg. You don't understand. what I'm saying.
No discredit to what Stephen and Rob and Paul have done with G.I. Joburg. I really enjoy it. I love watching the stuff on YouTube. But I don't think I would have been as into it as they are. I wouldn't have been a member of G.I. Joburg, but I think I would be a little bit more involved if things hadn't worked out the way they had.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, I know your name comes up a lot in this show, so it's even behind the scenes. Your name is still in front of the camera as well, for at least in front of the microphone. All right, so I want to get down into a little bit more of your actual playtime. So this is my curiosity, and I re-listened to, I think, your 100th or 200th episode where you guys went into some little partial stories, but I want to kind of get an idea. Because I would say that, as I mentioned, your fandom is just so praiseworthy and so thorough that you guys can remember. And Rob, you just indicated that Steve has such an amazing memory that he can recollect all this stuff.
He remembers it for us, so we don't have to.
You can switch that brain power to like comic books and other things, right? And Stallone and Schwarzenegger movies. But so I don't know, maybe Steve will kind of guide some of this from the archives of your collective memories here. But I want to go back to kind of how would a week of playtime with you guys as kids work? My curiosity is things like, did you take turns being like the game master who was in control of the narrative? Did you like have? Oh, was a laugh. Huh?
Sorry, I got a laugh there because probably 99% of the time Steve was the game master. It was a rare occasion that Rob would take the lead, and even rarer so that I would do it. For us, we were just given a bit of a missive, like pick a dude, pick some guns, and we're going on a mission or something to that effect.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's start with that. So Steve, sorry, I'm bumping my camera here. Let's start with that. So Steve, when you would, if you guys said, did you guys say like, okay, Saturday, my house, noon, we're gonna start, and then you would start preparing narratives and scripting and start building your VHS tape dioramas and all that stuff ahead of time? Did you have to say like, hey, I need you to bring these toys here, or it sounds like everything was already at your house, but like to walk me through a little bit of that preparation process.
I think during the week, ideas would germinate about sort of just vagaries of like a story. Like I'd love to have a scene set in a nightclub, or I'd love to involve this character, or I'd love to do a paradrop into like a giant jungle environment. So these little snapshots of scenarios that I wanted to play would be the starting point. Hand in hand with that was also like, what era of G.I. Joe are we situating ourselves in? Because for a time we tracked the new releases quite closely, like when the new sculpt G.I. Joes arrived, and the Devil's Due publishing comic was the hot news. I kind of wanted to play with those figures and those scenarios. For instance, Devil's Due did a kind of a reinstated situation where G.I. Joe had disappeared for 7 years. And
sorry, I don't want to interrupt your story. I just want to just so you guys know where I'm coming from. That is the point where I got into G.I. Joe. I had a few figures here and there as a kid. I remember I watched the cartoon movie as a kid, not many episodes. I remember the Rise of Prentorus, Arise story and everything had some of those figures. But mostly my introduction to the real G.I. Joe universe was from those toys and that comic book series. So that's kind of where I injected. So that's really interesting. Go on, Steve. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, long story long. I think our most involved storylines came out of the period just after the Devil's Due stuff. So after we'd all graduated high school, we actually created a universe separate to G.I. Joe. I mean, it had its roots in G.I. Joe, but we kind of created a what-if scenario. Like, what if Cobra had taken over North America and somehow walled the United States as a kind of an isolationist nation and kind of basically held it in its thrall. But there were three characters that tried to overturn this, and they started to uncover a covered up story, sort of the legend of G.I. Joe, like this freedom force that once opposed Cobra and has now become an underground movement. Anyways, like I said, long story long, this was eventually a dimension skipping plot line that I think must have captivated us. Like, all told, probably like a couple of months only, but it was a couple of months of intense, like every weekend Rob was coming around. Aleister, who lived 2 doors down, was like very quick behind, and typically we'd play after dark, like when the house was quiet and we had the run of the place. We would play into the early hours.
So usually indoors.
And out of doors. Fortunately, my folks' place had a nice spacious garden in the front, a garden in the back with a swimming pool. And there were interesting little like back passages. Like there was a section between the sort of one back wall and the neighbor's perimeter wall. And that formed a kind of a, I don't know, very ramshackle place filled with rubble and weeds and old bricks. That was fun. But the lounge was infinitely pliable as like, if you wanted to make it an outdoors environment, like if you wanted to make it a desert, you just turn all the lights on. And the carpet kind of has a brownish tan-ish hue to it, and the couches were all brown, so those were mountain peaks. So,
Yeah.
or you could make it an indoor environment by like using a cooler lighting scheme, like this.
Right.
Hey, there's your nightclub. You know.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Is this the same home that you went on the infamous Defiant or box opening when you were going around gathering each of the guys that were in their own nooks doing their thing? I think Rob was sleeping, if I remember.
Yes.
That was
absolutely right.
home.
And
okay.
correct. And the lounge that I speak of was where we chose to do the unboxing of the Defiant.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So
that was a crazy story. I had just gotten back from overseas, and we went straight into that thing.
I love that. That was a fun episode. That was the first time I kind of saw the group together. That was the first video I saw, at least with you guys. Okay, so going back a little bit. So I did have a question for you, Steve, about that, because I know how very, very anal, and I appreciate this because I have an OCD mind as well, how anal you are about the scaling. Were you equally OCD about crossing over different eras or years of G.I. Joe? Like, did you play with like Ninja Force and have them running around with characters that died off earlier in the actual canon, or was it just whoever characters you just played with them, or were you very strict on the narrative of the actual storyline of who was involved in the stories, like which Joes existed with which Joes?
I think I was certainly less OCD about separating eras, but then the toys themselves created these divisions. So when it was the New Sculpt era, all of a sudden those guys looked a little bit out of step with the classic O-ringers. Yeah. So we played with them as our core group and then used the other guys just peripherally, but never as our leads. And then, new products started popping up. Aleister, for instance, really embraced the generic power team elite figures because they had wrist articulation and thigh articulation and they looked good. That's crazy because clearly one man's trash is another man's treasure, because typically G.I. Joe fans are very quick to relegate that sort of thing to just like cannon fodder or filling up the background, or just using the vehicles, in fact, and tossing the figures completely. But Aleister didn't mind. He loved to embrace whatever tickled his fancy, even if it kind of stepped outside of the typical. But speaking of typical, I think there was always
It's true.
and another thing I'll give those generics is they were very durable. So I think Aleister had no fear,
like shoving all the guns in their hands.
Yeah, no broken thumbs.
To hold a gun.
Yeah.
So I get
we definitely did kind of, just to answer the question. I mean, we definitely did move through the eras and kind of adopt new things as they appeared. This OCD of mine is a fairly recent thing. It's more of a collector hang-up than a Playtime hang-up.
Okay, that's interesting.
And scaling, we could rip the roof off with scaling during our dimension hopping adventures, because if we suddenly wound up in Eternia, that's how you explain the fact that everyone is a little bit bigger and a lot wider.
Okay, that makes sense. So walk me more through the preparation. You would have an idea earlier on in the week. You start thinking about how you wanted the story. Did Al and Rob, did you guys always play the same protagonist, or did you guys did Steve start telling you guys kind of maybe what the adventure was going to be, and you could decide who you were going to play? Did he assign who you're going to play? How'd that work?
I think mainly, it depending, at least initially when there weren't like big stories like the Shifter story, or eventually when we started playing a Marauders storyline with the new sculpt core figures, it was just whoever you felt like playing with. There was no like specific characters that he was just like, choose one guy and then we'll make him work within whatever story I'm coming up with. Fortunately, Stephen wasn't strict about the stories. I think he had some idea of where he was going maybe, but you kind of were just along for the ride. Especially with the Shifters one, there was a specific character that you came up with initially, where we kind of like I suppose kit bashed the characters. We kind of like made them into our own figures to play with, so they were our own specific characters. So I mean, it just depended on what we were doing at the time, like who we were going to play with.
But he knew you were always going to be Scoop and sounds like Law and Order. Is that right? Pretty much.
or Beachhead.
Or
Yeah.
Beachhead. Gotcha. Okay. So,
Well,
so
Steve was the same. It was always Shockwave or Shockwave or Shockwave.
Always his favorite, yeah.
But yeah, I think within canonical like G.I. Joe, strict G.I. Joe games, of which we did play a few, particularly in the early periods. Yeah, it was a Scoop, Law, Shockwave split. Once we started doing these more creative, endeavors where it wasn't kind of a mix, more of a sci-fi mix, so it felt, we used G.I. Joe toys, but it felt a lot more like Star Wars or an episode of Star Trek. That's where we kind of diversified a bit.
gotcha.
Aleister actually kit bashed a Beachhead figure to make his avatar on that one.
So, Steve, when would you start the setup process for your nightclubs or the mountainscape or the bases or the whatever infiltration? Like, would that start the day they show up? Because you mentioned in one of the episodes that you would have them like tuck away into another bedroom while you did the setup, or did you start the setup prior to the day of the battle?
Yeah, Rob and I spent a
some-
lot of time stuck away in bedrooms.
Yeah, together alone. It was awkward.
I don't
With
want
you
to
guys
hear
get
those.
up to?
Playing with our toys.
Yeah, right.
What you boys doing in there? Playing with
And
each other.
Steve's out there playing with G.I. Joe together, and they're playing together alone in a bed. Whatever.
Well, Tim, you pretty much nailed it, man. Like, yeah, I would kind of do it on the day, basically. Unless it was a game that had kind of had percolating for a long time, and there were a handful of those where I'd kind of done pre-prep during the week, like things that required set pieces. But if the game basically was just like us battling our way through swaths of enemies in various different locations and in various different kind of what would you say, action set pieces. So if there was a sequence that required driving, to have appropriate vehicles in a position to be stolen and then utilized.
So you'd like lay out vehicles like along the couch or whatever, like whatever you had set up, you'd start just put them out there.
Sure, and it wasn't just limited to one room. I mean, we tended to really monopolize on the real estate. Like, fortunately, my folks' place operates in kind of a circuit, so you can kind of just almost endlessly have chase sequences down passages and through an alleyway and then through the kitchen and then round again. So we had ample racetrack.
So in the
shall we
evening,
say.
you would have this stuff
and then
set up. And you would have, and like your mom would go get like a glass of milk or something, and like be kicking over like your vehicles and everything. Would you have like figures like Cobra troopers like leaned up against vehicles like in a standing upright position, or were they just like laying on the carpet where they would be? Like, how did you set up characters like that? Because that kind of stuff is
very
interesting.
good, detailed question.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting. I think if I did that, our setup time would just multiply. And we're already kind of against the clock because these were being played late into the night. I had to worry about Robert and Aleister's like attention spans. It's like, I mean, typically Aleister was the guy who was like ready, armed, like about out the door, and I'm like, wait, El, I just need to like, put up some things for you to shoot.
We had to get to the popcorn of the movie
so-
at the end of
so-
the night. Come on.
Well, there's
Hurry it
a
up.
Matrix line that I think of a lot when it comes to my game style. It's guns, lots of guns.
It's true. It's true.
So the enemy,
I forget the
the opposition.
storyline, but I actually had used a Star Wars droid as my gun robot. It just followed me with all my guns on it, so I could change out whatever, whenever.
He was ahead of his time, man. Drone warfare.
Yeah,
That is little,
Tom
like-
Clancy, Advanced Warfighter. They use those. They call it a mule in the game.
Oh, yeah.
So, Steve, would you even have the figures laid out before, like, as they came into the room to start playing, or would you just like introduce them as you went with like a limited, like, because this was long before your troop building era, I'm sure.
I think we had sort of boss battles, perhaps, that I had laid out ahead of time. But let me tell you, Tim, at one point, in terms of the rank and file cannon fodder, sometimes I went as far as not even arm them. You know, just pretend they have guns, because to give like 24 Cobra troopers, not that I had 24 Cobra troopers, but you know, I had a ramshackle bunch of Vipers. The core were great, kind of like terrorists. So these guys would just be the guards or assault forces, and they would, you know, if I needed an instant like action scene, I would just kind of dump out a whole bunch of them and like manipulate them in turn, primarily to fall to Aleister's hail of gunfire and Rob to film them playing.
And so you're sitting there.
So that kind of worked itself out pretty well.
And they're already laying down, and then Aleister comes in and just blows them away, and you like set them up and drop them right back onto the carpet, pretty much.
When you say it like that,
I'm pretty sure that we
doesn't sound very sophisticated at all.
We all have an imagination.
Yeah, we never worried about the guns in the end because Aleister had all the guns. So.
So this is another question. If you did introduce guns into their hands, when you were setting up, or even your own characters, did you worry about having the guns like in there like the whole time? Because my problem when I would do setups for my own, I'd have big, huge, colossal battles in my living room. And I'm talking about in my adulthood. I would always it's tedious to arm them like you're saying, Steve, and I didn't have a time clock. But I would, or not, you know, I wasn't on the clock, but I'd have a hard time setting them up with their guns because I didn't have enough imagination to pretend they were armed without the guns. And it took a long time to set up my battles, and then it would take a much longer time to put everything back because now you're organizing. So my question, when you would arm them, with those older toys without the gummy grips, were you worried about them snapping fingers, like being placed with a weapon for a long duration of time as you were setting up or playing? Does that make sense? Because I would always have that problem. I didn't want to stretch out my hands or break the grips.
Well, this is kind of like really tracking our ascent into being old men, but it never used to be a concern to us. Like the thumbs, maybe because the plastic was younger, the thumbs did seem to have a bit more give.
Yeah.
So sometimes, I mean, you'd be pretty fearless with most grips. I think some weapons were off limits because they were just like, how would a guy ever hold that? That's way too thick. But almost like it was almost coveted to kind of stretch out the thumbs a little bit, like get a guy with really relaxed thumbs, and that was something that could happen if you were just, I suppose, incremental about how you inserted things. You know, graduate from something thinner to something thicker. But yeah, it was never concerned to me that guys were having their guns in their hands for prolonged periods of time. I mean, you'd be horrified to know that sometimes guys went back into the toy box, like machine gun, not only
with the guns in their hands,
tucked under the elbow, but tucked under the elbow.
Because it makes
as well,
it easier for next time when you play.
Yeah.
You know, because they keep the guns in their hands, especially the core figures that will just permanently the guns were in their hands.
Yeah. So even now, Steve, when you did your video showing your collection, Paul did the same thing, and there's a lot of guys that have their collections where the guys are just up there posing, but then you talk about these are the same guys that you'll play with. Like, is there a concern of preservation with them with displaying them with their weapons that you're not going to be able to use later, that there's going to break, especially with your childhood shockwave? You know, I mean, you brag about that thing all the time. How do you?
It's.
I'd be getting so nervous. But he's also worn in.
I have, well, exactly. I think that has a lot to do with their durability. Like, I am far more precious about new purchases that are coming to me like almost dead mint. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to put a gun in his hand. I don't want to take him outside. I'll get the paint scratched.
Yeah.
So the guys that are battle tested and worn I'm less precious about those guys. And at the same time, I am precious about them, but I know their tolerances. Like, I know that I can manipulate the leg and it's not going to snap. I can, manipulate the head and it's not going to crack the torso. Yeah. Whereas I've recently been buying like swivel arm guys, and those are terrifying. The 1983 version 1.5s are just
yeah.
oh
Okay.
stressful, man. Stressful.
It is. Like I mentioned, I started buying some of these based on just a lot of discussions you guys have and some of your reviews, and I'm like, once I get the weapon in there, I'm like, I don't want to. This isn't my childhood toy. I don't want to touch it. But I don't buy these things mint. And you've indicated, Steve, when you buy them, you like if there's, discoloring or broken issue or pieces or something like that, because then you don't have to treat them so fragilely. Aleister, do you still have your Law and Order and your Beachhead as a kid, or did you always borrow Steve's? Like, did you have all that?
Like I said, I never had a figure. I think I once found an Avalanche, and he was missing an arm. But on the house, I found it somewhere random, and I was like, I have a G.I. Joe.
So this is another.
But just
question.
going back to the previous thread on the conversation, just going back to the previous thread with Stephen and posing and hands, and something you need to understand, Tim. Steve was like beyond Yoda level of Jedi Master when it came to figures and posing and getting into stand and getting guns in and out of hands. I would struggle to get something right, and then he does it in less than a split second. He was really good at it. It was just a seasoned thing. I think that when he talked about that week of setting up, I think in that week he played through the game and physically a few times before we got there on the weekends. He was just so good at manipulating the toys, and you can see that in the films that they shoot now as well. It's just like a lifetime art, basically.
Yeah. And Steve, you mentioned that in one of your in one of the conversations on your show that you were, I think you were teasing Paul maybe, or you were teasing someone else that they were like couldn't get to bend right or something. Like, no, you guys were and I am too. Like, I mean, as a kid, I could move like 3 or 4 guys in one hand even before I had my big man hands. In moving them like in motion, not just like but have them like stepping like with my fingers able to maneuver and grip and direct gunfire, everything, and have sword fights, epic battles with kicks and swinging weapons and everything, all with my fingers. And I was like, I was really good at that as a kid. I still am, but it is a talent, like I said, Aleister, that comes over years and years of playing with. And I'm not surprised at all that Steve was able to just quickly throw out a collection and set up a big battle. This is two questions that came out what you just said. One.
You've just reminded me of something that I would be insistent that if our guys were sneaking through a jungle, you couldn't cut to the end of the sneak. You had to physically get onto your haunches and manipulate
where they hide and
through this
they
jungle.
move.
Like, this is part of the game, guys. You're supposed to take time with this. And I mean, even as a late teen and an early 20-something, the knees start taking a bit of a pounding from being so low for so long. But I would be insistent, like, no, your guy can't fly, so he's got to walk.
Yeah, that's why you get those pants with the padded knees for when you're down on your knees.
You guys are like carpenters or painters or plumbers. You guys are playing with your G.I. Joes in your BDUs in the backyard. So were you maneuvering like Cobra sentries and stuff while they were sneaking their guys and they had to like wait for you to look the other way? Was it that detailed?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So
I think when we got into a later stage where we literally had to cut through thousands of cannon fodder, that's when things got a little bit loose. But yeah, if I was still in the real serious setup phase, I'd have Cobra sentries in places. Yeah.
Okay, so 2 questions for Aleister just said. One is he was mentioning. Well, he mentioned like some of the characters. Did it bother you? Because this bothers me whenever I watch the cartoon. It bothers me a lot. Does it bother you having like cold weather characters with regular casual characters with desert characters all sitting in the same vehicle in the same battle? It's like you're watching like these Arctic fighters in their Arctic clothing fighting like in what you set up as like a desert or urban environment or something. To me, it's just ridiculous. Who was it? Was it Iceberg? Or who was your your first Arctic character, Steve, that you bought that you always talk about? Was it Iceberg?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, a character like that, except for like having cool accessories like skis It's like I've never understood the appeal of and I have a bunch of them now, but I never understood the appeal of like cold weathered fighters, because you're always fighting in like a jungle or desert type of traditionally environment. It's just like they're out of place, and they're targets wearing complete white clothes. Did that ever bug into your childhood OCD, or is that just me? Because I can't stand watching the cartoons when you have them all wearing they look comical. Look, they're dressed like that in a tomahawk with a desert guy and a snow guy.
I think eventually it really
I
didn't
think he
bother
wanted
us.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it's been talked about a few times in your 200 plus episodes of podcast, when we would have our favorite character, and then it's a series of different missions over a couple of weeks or months, and Steve takes us to different locations. We actually made clothing for our Joes to get them to go to like snowy tundra and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
I don't want to brag about it, but Rob's was the worst.
Yeah, I don't think I put any effort into it. It's probably like a hole in a cloth thing. I put it over and it's like elastic bands.
No, dude,
He's
you
ready
just,
for the
you just
call.
wrapped him up with like a strip of white fabric, like a mummy.
Oh, yeah. I probably used like tissues as well. Real creative.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we did pay attention to that sort of thing. Like Dusty would not go to the desert, to the snow, for example.
Gotcha.
He was used for urban or desert things.
Yeah, that kind of stuff bugs me in the cartoons. I'm like, I get this is the character and that's their specialty, but it's ridiculous having them. But that's just me. That's cool. You guys would actually incorporate the terrain with what garb they were wearing, and you guys would customize. That's really interesting. Now, did you guys get into little fights of like, I shot you, no, I shot you first, kind of a thing? Like Steve would have a character going down, and you'd be like, oh no.
I think this is where I'm going to just end the chat. I'm going to go.
Okay, cool,
No, I'm
dude.
kidding.
Pleasure,
I'm
Aleister.
kidding.
You don't want to be crucified.
No, there were definitely many a moment. Many.
So tell me about some of that drama. I'm really curious. Because Steve is, as the game master, you traditionally, or I guess normally, he would be letting his characters fall. But was there little debates between? I mean, and I'm sure Robert was just walking around filming all of Aleister's like just brutal murders. Like, is that pretty much what happened?
No, those days were way before filming. Thank goodness.
I'm talking about Scoop walking around.
Oh,
Yeah,
No, I
Screw.
just go around making jokes the whole time, really. That was my function in games.
yeah, Rob, you were definitely the funny one, breaking the tension a lot. But there were a couple of moments when toys were thrown to the floor and people walked out the room, and we just then
Tantrums
sat
were
there.
had?
Okay.
Really?
Yeah, I'll go home now. Bye.
Okay.
Because the character died. Or
Because
because-
a character was a kind of a main villain, and I tried desperately to cling to some kind of internal continuity. So if you killed Major Blood last week, he's off the table. There's no more Major Blood in this universe. So I kind of made up contrivances that were like, no, he got on a jetpack and blasted out the window. And Alice is like, well, I just riddled him with a machine gun. Good luck with that, What's this jetpack made out of that it can withstand, like, this onslaught? So, there were moments like that kind of caused a bit of friction.
That's fun.
But then also, there was one instance where I had the inspiration to have the Joes accompany a diplomat. This is actually inspired by an old Marvel comic, G.I. Joburg Marvel comic, that they would escort a high-value person of interest to a location. But one of the Joe team members, in fact, turned out to be a traitor and was the assassin embedded in this team. And that kind of pull out the rug from under you moment really did not sit well with Al. He was like, no, I'm out. But it speaks to the level of like,
Yeah, we can laugh about it now.
at least we can laugh about it now. But I love to make this example because it speaks to the level of like involvement that we had in this story, the inner life of these characters. Like I did go into performance and drama as a career choice. Rob and Elle did not, and yet we were all seriously invested. At that point, I think, you couldn't hear a pin drop. Like, the tension was so high. And then this guy reveals that actually he's the traitor. How do you respond to that? Well, Elle responded by saying, no, fuck this, I'm out. You can't do that. But yeah.
I did want to ask about that. How involved was the role-playing among you guys with the different characters? Were you like throwing out your little childhood and teenage voice acting skills, like just role-playing out the characters? Or is this just something that came, or were you just playing through like a video game as you've described it before?
No, there was voice acting.
Became very involved.
Yeah, I mean, as much as the action scenes, there was the in-between stuff, yeah.
Oh, cutscenes and stuff.
There were attempts at speaking foreign languages, or some kind of like approximation of foreign languages,
right?
Some kind of faux Russian. But Rob, you made an interesting note there that like we did play the in-between stuff. Like if I was kind of dragging my heels in terms of the setup for action, there'd be a sequence where we're just on the transport plane having a dialogue amongst each other in character. And those almost were more interesting. Well, they were definitely more interesting to me because I wasn't just putting up pop-up targets in front of Elle. And I don't know if those were necessarily interesting for you, Elle.
It depends.
Maybe
depends.
you were
I mean,
anxious
I
to
know
get
we
things
always tried to
going.
create this very movie-esque feel to the games, especially in later years as we grew up and evolved, and we got influences from different things and just matured in general. But I do appreciate what you were doing in terms of the static dialogue. It doesn't have to be all guns blazing all the time, as much as I did enjoy it.
And that was one of my questions. Now, Steve, you blew my mind one time in your podcast when you said that you were much more invested in conversations and like the debriefing scenes and everything more than the actual combat itself. And then my mind, this is where one of the many reasons I wanted to talk to you guys about this. Like that is so cool to me that you even had a debriefing scene. Like so many kids wouldn't even bother, it would cut right to the action. But like that you would have a setup, have a debriefing, have a mission, and then I was going to ask, did it cut right from there to the action, to the dropping, or to the infiltration? Or I was going to ask, and you just answered, did you guys actually have conversations in cockpits and in hall or whatever the the belly of the whale, all that stuff? Like, did you guys do that? So you had that dialogue, but how detailed was your debriefing sequence of that? Because that is so cool to me.
It depends. Wildly varies from game to game, but sometimes, it was essential to bring the guys up to speed, at least on where my head was at in terms of what the objective was and what kind of personnel were tapped for the mission and what our insertion method was. Like that just built the excitement and kind of it served to get us in the right frame of mind. I think if we just cut to the action, it wouldn't be not nearly as immersive. But if you built the world, if you not only had the briefing, but then also had like the truck ride to the airstrip, and then boarding the plane, and then a little bit of a scene playing out in the aircraft, and then the para drop. Then by the time you hit boots on the ground and you were slogging through that jungle, you did so with a smile on your face, didn't you, boys? No, because you kind of were fully immersed.
What you're describing there also, I have memories. I don't know the details of it. Maybe you would, again, with the better memory. But that transport from briefing to plane, then the flight, whatever, you also used it maybe 2 or 3 times as a way of unveiling a new toy that you'd gotten and were very proud of, and we didn't even know about it. And it was a surprise.
That's awesome.
Like a new jet or a new helicopter. And we came into this room for the first time that day, and there's this new toy, and we're going to board it and go on a mission. I think the Tomahawk might have been one of those.
That's super cool.
I think that's true, yeah.
I didn't have enough imagination, even playing as I grew up. It was always, I would set up my headquarters, and my favorite, because I never had the original command center, and I never appreciated it until I saw it in person. I still don't have one, but how big it is. I thought it was a pretty simple and boring design. But I love that whatever the 90s, the command center, whatever, with the falling tower and everything. That thing is awesome. But I would always just set up this thing against like an ottoman and like the wall, and that would be like I would have this kind of a from Lord of the Rings, a Helm's Deep kind of engagement, that this was the fortress, and it would just be about penetrating and fighting through. And that base is awesome for that kind of a setup. But that's all it would be. I would always be as unimaginative as it would just be a simple military base, and maybe a couple commanders would be there like investigate or just do an inspection or whatever with a couple of select Joes, and then Cobra would do this big attack and take it over, and then Joe would have to come in with all of their power and come in and take it back. But through all that setup, I would never get through the actual battle because I would get preoccupied or run out of time before the actual big battle. But I, like Steve, had more fun with the setup and the infiltration part and the takeover than the actual big battle at the end, which playing by yourself is just so much. Because I would have like every Joe I had out there. But I did that same campaign over and over and over. I didn't have nightclubs and all this kind of stuff and reveals and hangar bays and stuff. So I love that. I love how involved you guys were.
I don't know if you, sorry, Tim, I don't know if you play much video games, Xbox or PlayStation or something, but if you can imagine the way Call of Duty and Medal of Honor run between actual gameplay missions, the movie sequences.
Yeah.
That was the kind of thing that Steve set up. It was that getting to know the character. He would pose questions to get the dialogue going, and we just had to make stuff up and develop our own character.
So, okay, and I know we're running out of time because Steve has to go, but like, did you guys start formulating your characters in your own little narrative, or did it start as you became more exposed to the comics and other things? Did you start kind of playing your characters more to the way they were presented in those other mediums?
Good question, Tim. Personally, I think obviously we injected a lot of ourselves into these characters, so I wouldn't say they necessarily. I mean, Shockwave is a blank slate. Law has very little, if any, comic book appearances and cartoon appearances. I mean, there's the film, but I think Aleister, you saw the film long after you'd kind of really adopted this figure. So, Law was you. The movie
I was more into that pure military look. I wasn't into the different colors and the neon vipers and the whatever. I was more into the realism, and I would try to bring that across in my gameplay, apart from mowing down 100 guys in a second.
But did you have a template for his character, El? I think that's the root of what we're trying to get to. Like, was there an action film star?
From a characteristic and personality? No, from a personality point of view, it was me.
Yeah,
I think that would be true. Yeah.
And it sounds like that was the same for you, Rob, with Scoop just being sarcastic.
Yeah, it was just me the whole time. I mean, I would take it seriously most of the time, so we'd really get into what Stephen was on about. And it was always cool because, I mean, it's much better than kind of just constantly assaulting one thing over and over again. That's, I think, what kept it going for so long, into our 20s, is that there was always a narrative, there was always something interesting and new to kind of keep you interested and want to keep playing, because you weren't just playing the same thing over and over. But no, definitely, I mean, also depending on the game, I think we basically created our own characters rather than kind of basing it off what was being presented in, any other media. And then I just make a whole bunch of jokes, so.
So, having just said that, Rob, how many times did Scoop die? And after having just said that and adopting this narrative,
I don't think any of our characters ever died.
Never died.
We survived the entire way. I mean, other characters might die, but I mean that's because Stephen wanted them to die.
I would kill my character off because of something that Steve did that irritated me, and that's so I could get out.
That's true. Though.
So you throw a fit and that's fine.
Like literally, he would just like fall over dead, and I walk out the room.
That happened a couple of times.
Yeah.
Equivalent.
I want to kill this guy. Let me kill him.
So Steve, that was the other question too. So on the other side, with you playing most of the antagonists, was it all just like Cobra Troopers and like just non-specific characters that would die as casualties of Al, or would real characters start dying, Major Blood and other people?
So we, for a time, drifted away from Cobra being the antagonists at all. I mean, I guess we kind of had a thirst for realism, later on, and the gaudy uniforms of like the ramshackle Vipers that I had didn't do it for us. So we shifted the villains to the core, and they're kind of more muted color palettes, and actually made it the war on drugs, because the core were a bunch of sort of like drug lords from
South American
from
drug
down
lords,
south.
Oh, come on,
Exactly.
Carlos Duarte.
The Scorpion with
Yeah.
a K.
With
Yeah, man,
was the headman that that's kind of his world too, right? Isn't he a drug?
never had a headman figure, and didn't have much exposure to the character either. I think he was a real flash in the pan in the comic books, and we didn't have many of those issues to hand.
So playing with the core gave you less attachment, that you could just kill off these characters.
Yeah, and I suppose be more
But
imaginative.
the problem
as well.
with
beholden to a pre-established narrative.
Yeah, that's true. What were you gonna say, Steve?
So, well, the problem I always had was I would then go ahead and make them named characters. But once again, we're talking in two different eras here, because yes, the core did eventually become pure cannon fodder. They were just like military-looking guys that weren't Cobra, for us to fight. Whether that
Mercenaries.
mean, mercenaries or Russian soldiers or whatever, whoever the kind of the third faction bad guys were. But before that happened, in this kind of like South American drug lord campaign, all of the core members we had at that time were named characters, and they were unique individuals, and they were preserved and survived mission to mission, and became this ongoing antagonists.
Yeah, I think I mean, we played essentially almost over 2 decades, 20 years. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we did that changed a lot, and that's what kept it interesting, kept us playing, I think. And the popcorn at the end of the night in the movie, it was always worth waiting for.
So just to we'll wrap up, because I know you guys. I could go on for hours asking, because I'm just so intrigued with this. I should have been some kind of a psychologist that focuses specifically on childhood toy play.
Childhood toy play.
Yeah. One was it always?
We could talk for hours on the subject.
Yeah.
Honestly, like we're basically just always
Tip of the iceberg here.
maybe rehashing the same points because we're always just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Like I really should maybe chronicle this stuff in writing somehow.
If it would be so fun to walk through, to the best of your memory, of like a campaign or just a story that you did, and it would be so fun to kind of walk through like how that went, and you guys remember, because I know sometimes like you may not remember. If I asked like Rob or Al or even you, Steve, about a specific sequence that maybe individually you guys couldn't remember all the details, but as you guys started talking about something, things would start clicking and memories would start coming out. That would be a really fun conversation for you guys, trying to like taking something, trying to work through it. And I bet you a lot would resurface from that. But was it always just the realism? It sounds like you guys, when you started doing like interdimensional fighting He-Man and dinosaurs or whatever, and Terminators from your stories too. Was it always the realistic military, like bullets and like frag grenades and stuff, or was there ever blue and red lasers in your imaginations? Was it always just true to the realistic side of it?
It all depends.
Really?
I mean, I can't remember which series of games it was, but it was a sci-fi thing, and we each had our own spaceship or 2 spaceships. I mean, I chose Thunderclap as my spaceship, and it was this fast-moving, like rapid-firing cannon. It was ridiculous.
Wow. With laser guns. I'm floored. I would never have thought that you guys, based on your stories, would have been playing with like almost the cartoon imagery in your playtime. It would have been more the realistic side of it. That's interesting.
Tim,
bit of both.
it went even further. At one point, we were super powered, and so we wouldn't even bother with weapons. We
Use
kind of
punch
just
everyone
have
to
this
death.
kind of super speed. Yeah, you'd use martial arts. This is
Matrix
very
style.
heavily Matrix inspired.
Matrix. I was gonna say, was this the Marvel toys that stirred this up when they came out their X-Men line you've talked about, or was this like Ninja Force characters? But you're saying
No.
Matrix inspired. Wow. Much later.
Yeah, so as late as 1999, we were kind of kit bashing chose to kind of look more matrixy. Like I obviously one has this obsession with like all in black. So that became a thing. Like the darker palettes, we kind of skew more towards figures that had darker clothes. And obviously martial arts played a big role, and sword play. Like, who needs a gun that can run out of ammo when you've got this sword that can just cut down thousands of cannon fodders?
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have to worry about them getting blunt. That wasn't a concern. That said, this is the tip of the iceberg, and I'd love to continue this sometime. You know, if these gents can make themselves available again.
Let's do it. I would love to try and do a breakdown of if you could, maybe you could think about that, Steve. If there's maybe a story that you think would be the strongest to try and to remember and kind of relive in discussion, I would love that if we go through and kind of break down what you guys remember and just kind of go through the phases of your adventure. If that would be fun, I mean, for me it would. I don't know how that would be for you guys. Straining to remember that.
No, maybe not this Shifters sort of alternate universe. Maybe I would pick something more rooted in G.I. Joe.
Yeah. That's what I recall.
So something like Marauders would probably be quite a good one, I think. But yeah, Tim, this has been awesome.
Which was the one when Rob's character was the guy?
Renegades.
Was that Renegades?
Rob's remembering it as Marauders.
Oh, Marauders. I keep calling it Marauders. Okay, that's Renegades. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of
that was one of the
Galaxy, mate.
We had to go across this zip line from a building to a building or something, and Steve and I have got our characters going upside down, hand over hand, leg to leg, and Rob's guy just like walks across like a tightrope.
I love it. I love everything that you guys do on GI Joburg, and I love the support you get from Aleister, obviously, and they always have fun noting and acknowledging Al from their childhood stories. It sounds like a lot of fun, but it's them just remembering how fun it is. It's like it's an inside joke for them that we're like, it's great. So I don't know. I must be awesome to be able to get him to come to a discussion with me, because you can barely get him on Joburg.
Well, thanks for hosting us, Tim. This has been an absolute pleasure. And maybe to cap things off, the reason G.I. Joburg exists is fueled by this nostalgia.
Absolutely.
So the foundations that we were creating back then have made memories that have kind of propelled us to keep this passion alive. So that's how strong these play sessions and how important the memories of them were to us. Yeah, no, this is my happy place, gents.
Yeah,
bar none.
That's why I appreciate you guys, and especially your collective memories of this so much, because I was as a child of two Navy parents, I moved around a lot as a kid, so like my little collections of friends like could never hone in on one specific franchise like this. I think Ninja Turtles was my biggest thing, because I was living in one spot during kind of that the heyday for Ninja Turtles, and that was a lot of the fun I had. But I mean, I had little memories of playing with other things, but I wished I had been in one place long enough to have such a lifelong friendship like you guys have, that had 20 years of playing with these things and enjoying them. But in my case, probably all my friends would have grown out of it long before you guys ever have, or probably ever will. So I love diving in to what you guys have had as friends, because it's something that's really cool to me, and it's an interest. And I would love to come back and talk more about it. But I really appreciate you guys joining me and Rob and Aleister. It was a pleasure meeting you guys. You guys are awesome. Not to steal Rob's favorite word. And this has been
it's awesome that you enjoyed having us here. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much, guys. So anyway, thanks, gents, and I'll let you guys go on with your days/nights, whatever you're doing.
I think it's nighttime for me and Al. It's morning for you, Steve.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Bright and early. Thanks for the sacrifice and collaborating, guys. It's been fantastic. I have many more questions to revisit. All right.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I hope you have a good weekend.
You too. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Joburg. Yo, Joburg.
Cheers, guys.